Hey guys, just finished. Well, I mean, I finished playoffs, but it's still going on right now. I wanted to bring you guys the lineup um, I brought to playoffs for Grandmasters season one. Well, season one of this year. Um, Now I skipped a week last week, but I ended up bringing the four same decks. There's a few card changes this week that I'll kind of go over, but I think this the cards I used this week were probably better if I had brought them last week as well. So it's imagine last week gets absorbed into this week because this is just probably the better sort of list that you want in best of five conquest. Um, Now, no surprise, you'll still see warrior, demon hunter, kind of the strongest classes that I think are in the meta right now, and warlock with quest warlock. Interestingly to note, despite Druid doing relatively poorly, at least in terms of GM statistics, I still think it was the best deck to bring right now, and I'll get into that once we get to the deck, but I'll start off with the sort of basics already. Warrior, nothing too fancy here. I'm sure this is like a 30 card copy paste from the previous weeks, and it's a staple. You kind of have to bring it in your lineup. Everyone's probably going to ban it, and if they don't, you're probably going to get a win with it. Egg package this week. Most of the fourth decks people are bringing are kind of temp oriented, so having eggs and Gorfing help with that. Still have Corcoran Grom as some sort of burst, but otherwise the deck's pretty solid. Skipper package, Corsair Cash, Ankar, Armorsmith, bread and butter for lineups. Demon Hunter I haven't been a huge fan of, but I still think it's kind of worth bringing. I believe last week I didn't have Sigil Runners, I had Sightless Watchers. And I think that wasn't optimal. I think having the Sigil Runners actually helps quite a lot. I think you have enough burst in the deck where you just, if you can cycle through most of it consistently, you're just going to kill your opponent. I think the popular list on ladder right now is 2 Spectral Sights, 1 I-Beam, but I think that's kind of weird because with all the decks I'm expecting in playoffs, all the fourth decks basically, which can be Druid, Hunter, or Rogue mainly, they're all kind of tempo-oriented decks that still kind of want to kill you. So I feel like I-Beam is very important in that sense, and also in the mirror, I-Beam is very, very big at switching, creating swing turns where your opponent tries to set lethal, you I-Beam out of range, and that can help. It's also pretty decent actually against Quest Warlock. It lets you face tank some of the big Abyssal Summoner demons and heal back up off of that. Otherwise, most of the cards here are still pretty staple. Shadow Weaver for the mirror, and also kind of useful in other matchups as well, but I think only like 26 cards here are probably core from what you'll see in a lot of lists, and then I have Sigil Runners, which I think a lot of other people brought this. Actually, no, some people didn't bring Sigil Runners. A lot of people brought Blowtorch Saboteurs, which I actually tested a little bit, but I felt were a little too clunky. When it hits in the mirror, and even against Quest Warlock, and even against some other decks, obviously everyone has a hero power, but I felt it was a little too clunky. And if you have the nut curve with the Saboteur, great, but if you have the nut curve anyways, I mean, I'd rather just have better cards. Other people came to a different conclusion, brought it. I don't think it's awful to have in the deck. In my testing, it didn't feel great, so I didn't include it. Yeah, not much to say here. Warrior and Demon Hunter feel like a pretty big staple. I stayed off Demon Hunter for as long as I kind of could, but I think it would be a mistake not to bring it this week. And I think all the other Grandmasters kind of agreed because I think they all had them in the lineups as well. I've spoken pretty powerfully about this deck. I think Quest Warlock is probably the strongest deck in the game right now. Warrior is probably a bit more consistent, but this is still pretty powerful in what it can do. And I think we've kind of got towards a more normalized list because I believe a lot of people, at least I didn't pay attention to most of the deck lists outside of my division. Sorry, not my division, my bracket for playoffs, which was myself, Eddie, Firebat, and Empanizado. I think these were the exact 30 cards that all 3 players who brought Quest Warlock in my group brought, which is kind of cool. I think I don't want to say, don't quote me, but I think I popularized like the Ooze list on Soulfire, and then the rest of the deck feels really core because there's not that many flex cards. So I'm happy to see that everyone is kind of coming on a conclusion of this. I mean, it's still fun seeing people have their different takes on it, but it's very rare you have a deck like this that has some flex spots where you want to bring extra burst, extra removal, or healing, or whatever. Interesting to see that everyone, at least in my group, came to the same 30 cards. I think in the past I didn't have Abyssal Summoners. I had one maybe. And I thought too it's just such a strong card. It's insane. It's really good against all the fourth decks as well. A little weaker against Hunter because they have stuff like Varanus and Zephyrs to get through it and have a big tempo swing. But it's hard for Rogue to deal with. It's hard for Druid to deal with. The mirror, it requires an answer. Even against Demon Hunter, it's still a big sort of thing. I tested a lot this week with Dark Portal. I shouldn't say a lot. I tested with Dark Portal, and I was so close to bringing -1 questing Dark Portal or -1 Abyssal Dark Portal. But the more I tested, and the reason to bring this is to be better in the mirror. I was getting tired of getting scammed by my opponents having 0 mana Malyghost, and I'm sitting here trying to count damage in my hand, setting up 2-turn lethal, and they're just like 0 mana Mally, another Breathy for 9, Soul 5 for 9, Rain of 5. And it happened. Most of the quest lock mirrors I've lost have just been a 0 mana Malyghost, and that feels fucking awful. Nothing more to say about that. So I thought this was like the one way to get an edge, because it actually increases the chance you draw your Malyghost, even if it's not 0 mana. Even Alex, getting an Alex for 4 mana would be pretty good. But this guarantees a minion draw. So when you're late game tapping to try and get the expensive stuff discounted, you can bypass the spells in your deck and try to draw one of the minions. It doesn't matter if it's 0 mana or 4 mana. It's still useful to have it discounted. But in the end, I felt like it took percentages away from the other matchups that I didn't want to become weaker in anyways, so left that out. But if you're on ladder, I'd recommend trying this out. This is actually pretty cool to play with. And I did play a little bit on ladder with it myself, I think a week or two ago, but in the end I decided it's probably, it's not core, but interesting tech card. Maybe if the meta slows down, it's useful. And finally, fourth deck. There's a lot of debate on what the fourth deck bring is. I've seen a lot of people leaning towards Rogue. I think Eddie brought Rogue, Firebat brought Rogue, and even outside of my group, I've seen a lot of people bring Rogue. Europe was Rogue popular as well. Some people lean towards Highlander Hunter. Not a huge fan of those two decks personally. Not that Druid is exactly the powerhouse either. They all have their weaknesses, and that's why they're fourth decks, and that's why people are trying to figure out what's the least bad option. But I still think Druid has an edge over all the other fourth decks, with the exception of Hunter. And even then, in the Hunter matchup, you can still kind of high roll wins, which is kind of what you do with every deck anyways, but I felt Druid was probably the way to go, because you can build it to try and be better against Quest Warlock and Demon Hunter. And I expected everyone to bring Demon Hunter and most people to bring Quest Warlock. I'm still surprised people didn't, and I think that was a big mistake on their part, but that's their prerogative. Also, I could just be wrong, but I don't think I am. Now, this Druid list is actually probably the only deck that I really tried to tinker with and get to a place where I felt like I could get an edge over the field. I've spoken a lot about how much I don't like the fact that most decks right now are just high roll central, and you just try to draw your good cards and kill your opponent because you drew the good cards, and I tried to minimize the impact of how that could happen against this deck. And slightly lost my train of thought, but that's fine. Basically, I looked at some statistics on HS Replay to find out what cards are kind of the least useful in the matchups I was expecting. So I looked at stats for Druid against Demon Hunter, Druid against Warlock, Druid against Druid, Druid against Hunter, and Druid against Rogue, and I tried to try to see if there was a common sort of factor or card that was just across the board kind of weak. And lo and behold, I found a pretty low win rate for Power of the Wild, which is really weird, because you're thinking, well, you make tokens and stuff, Power of the Wild just buffs your whole board. Why? Of course you want to run Power of the Wild. Now, Power of the Wild had a very high played win rate, which makes sense, because if you play Power of the Wild, you probably have a board that you're buffing, which means you're in a good spot. But drawn win rates were just not great for it across the board. So I thought, okay, well, if Power of the Wild is only... there's a lot of cards that are just conditionally good in a lot of decks, but if Power of the Wild is only conditionally good when you're ahead, and I feel like this deck, once it's ahead, it's fine at that point. You don't... of course, you want to be able to close out the game with stuff like Savage Roar and Power of the Wild, but I feel like if you gain a foothold in the game, you'll probably be okay against most of the fourth decks. Against Demon Hunter, it's still a little risky, and against Warlock, it's more about keeping a sticky board. But I ended up cutting Power of the Wild, and I put in Claws. Now, this helps a lot against Demon Hunter. In testing, most of the time, if I had Claw early, it helped me win the game. And if you look at games of Druid versus Demon Hunter, a lot of the times you kind of die because you can't answer their first threat or their second threat or the third threat. So I thought, okay, let's take out Power of the Wild and add another answer or removal. And you might say, all right, well, Languagehacker, why are you only running one Wrath then? Turns out having a 1-mana removal spell against Demon Hunter specifically, where most of their minions have 2 health, is incredibly powerful. It lets you do some very interesting things when you're trying to plan out the rest of your turns and account for the fact that you just need to spend 1 mana to deal with your opponent's threat, right? One example is, let's say you have Wild Growth into Overgrowth. Okay, you play Wild Growth, next turn you have 5 mana, you can go Overgrowth Claw. Beautiful. You can't do that with Wrath. Even on turn 3, if you have something like Wild Growth, Innervate, Claw, same thing. I mean, I'm basically stating instances where it's better to spend 1 mana on removal instead of 2, and clearly it's just better to, if both cards remove the thing that you're trying to remove, it's better to spend 1 mana on it than 2. Anyways, Claw performed very well in testing. I think some other players in the playoffs came to this conclusion as well. I don't think anyone else brought 2 Claws. I think Empanizado brought 1, and I didn't pay enough attention to the other people, but I don't think they ended up bringing Claws. Now, the other card that I cut was... What was the other card that I cut? There's something else missing here that's kind of wacky. Rising Winds. Some people already cut down to 1 Rising Winds, and the benefit of Rising Winds is that you can play it on 2 and 3 to draw into your ramp. Now, in my deck, you'll notice that I'm running 2 Wild Growths and 2 Overgrowths. Most people are running 2 Overgrowths. Some people are running 1 Wild Growth now as well, at least in the full token list. The Dragon list is a completely different story, and I'll get to that in a second. But I felt like consistently having the ramp into the power cards is how you win the games. Obviously, Rising Winds can help you get that consistency, but I felt adding more removal just sets you up in kind of the same vein, right? Like, you're always mulliganing for Fungal Fortunes, not always Wild Growth, but sometimes Wild Growth and Glowfly Swarm. And then if you have some heavier ramp cards that you're keeping already, you can consider keeping Mount Sailor and stuff like that. So with adding more removal and consistent ramp, I felt that you don't need the Rising Winds. Of course, the Rising Winds could still help, but you can't fit everything in this deck. There's only 30 cards. So I settled on this week with the inclusion of Claws, another Wild Growth, and I didn't talk about it, but a second Soul of the Forest. Now, the Soul of the Forest in tandem with Glowfly Storm, and even with just a Mount Sailor board, was, I think, the key to trying to beat Warlock. You'll find a lot of the games that the Warlock gets shut out in are games where they just can't deal with the whole board. Ramp into Mount Sailor, they just don't have enough mana to top deck Helden or play Nether. They can sometimes go more Grain of Fire, but if you have just a couple of spells with Mount Sailor on turn 7, something like Iron Bark, Bogbeam, Moonfire, Innervates, it gets out of range of that really quickly. And if they can't deal with that, perfect. You get another turn to play more spells, make a stickier board, play Soul, maybe push some damage with Roar. So, yeah, that's kind of what I had as a vision for this week, trying to beat or be better against Warlock and Demon Hunter with these cards. I think in the mirror, you might lose a bit of some percentages by not having Rising Winds to get that consistency, because obviously Claw doesn't help that much in the mirror. But I think Strong Mulligans will help with that. It won't completely alleviate it, but it can help. And I didn't expect that many people to bring Druid based off the previous weeks and how it performed in general. Which, despite that, I still think it's probably at least in my eyes, for the field that I expected, was the best 4th deck to bring. Wasn't a huge fan of the Dragon list. I tried 2 Emerald Explorers and the Breath of the Dreams. It just felt really inconsistent. Obviously, when you hit it, it's great, but I've spoken to this before. I don't try to just... Sometimes you just have to bring decks and try to high roll them, but this just adds more variance to it, because if you're keeping this, you're just hoping to draw the dragon, but Wild Growth has no condition. Obviously, you pay one more mana for it, which kind of sucks, but I was trying to go for a more consistent game plan instead of trying to high roll, and this felt like a bit more of a high roll deck. Or at least more of a high roll deck than what it already is. And there's also I think the 5 dragon list or 4 dragon list, which has a similar game plan. And again, I'm not a huge fan of running Fungal Fortunes with that whole package, which means if I really wanted to, I could cut Fungal Fortunes, include the dragon package, but then I feel like I'm doing more mediocre things more often, but not having the strength of the high roll from the deck. So I didn't like that whole route, which is why I ended up sticking to this. Now, fortunately, I got knocked out in I won my initial match against Empanizado. I lost to Eddie in the win-in, and then I lost again to Empanizado in the decider match. So I will not be going to Worlds, at least from Season 1, which means I'm out. But still a good season. I mean, you're always going to be upset or disappointed if you can't make it to the top, but still, I think I finished 5th or 6th or something, which was something to be proud of. I mean, even top 8 is just good, right? Having the being in Division A was a win, getting to playoffs is a win, and even within playoffs, winning at least the set was a win. So proud of what I've done. Hopefully next season I can try to qualify through to the World Championship. Otherwise, these were the deck lists. There'll be a bit of a break until next GM season, but once that starts up again, you can expect to see more of these lineup videos from me. And I might even add them for the Master Tours events, even though they happen a bit more infrequently. Otherwise, stay tuned for guides, maybe some random games I play on ladder now. And yeah, deck lists are below. Smash that subscribe button, and you can follow me on Twitter and Twitch, also link in the chat. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Have a good one.